Samantha's double life began as a secret of desire but ended in blood, betrayal, and a husband's silent revenge. Samantha and David had always appeared like the couple everyone admired. Their home was neatly arranged, their smiles always seemed genuine, and their life looked effortless from the outside. Friends often said they were perfect for each other, but what no one knew was how far from perfect their marriage had quietly become. Samantha had changed over the past few months. She used to be warm, playful, and deeply caring. Now her affection felt forced, her laughter hollow. David could feel it, a gap slowly growing between them, wide enough to swallow the trust they once shared. David had a simple life. He worked long hours as an electrician, often leaving home before sunrise and returning after dark. His hands were calloused from years of hard labor. His clothes smelled faintly of metal and sweat, and his mind always stayed focused on making a comfortable life for them. He took pride in being reliable, the kind of man who never let his wife worry about bills or food or safety. He thought that was enough. He thought being a good provider meant he was a good husband. But Samantha's needs had drifted somewhere he could no longer reach. She had started her own online boutique, selling handmade items and luxury clothing. The business grew fast, attracting clients across the city. With success came attention, and with attention came temptation. She spent more time away from home, attending business meetings and client dinners that stretched late into the night. She wore new clothes, expensive perfume, and her phone never left her hand. David noticed the shift, but he couldn't bring himself to question her directly. He didn't want to believe the worst. The first time he truly suspected something was wrong was a small moment. One night after dinner, Samantha's phone buzzed repeatedly. She grabbed it instantly, turned her back, and typed quickly before setting it down face down on the table. David asked who it was, and she said it was a client, her tone too casual, her eyes too bright. Later that night, when she went to shower, the phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen. Just one name, Ryan, a name that didn't belong to any client he knew. The next morning he tried to act normal, but his mind was restless. At work, he kept replaying the moment, the way she smiled at her screen, the way she avoided his eyes. He felt something cold growing inside him, not anger, not yet, but a creeping sense of dread. He told himself not to jump to conclusions. He wanted to trust her. But trust was becoming heavier to carry with each passing day. Soon, little things began piling up. Samantha started coming home later and later, sometimes smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his. She spent hours on video calls behind closed doors, claiming she was discussing business deals. When David entered the room unexpectedly, she minimized her laptop window so fast it looked like instinct. The air between them thickened with unspoken tension. He tried to bring her closer, suggesting dinner dates, short trips, even quiet evenings together, but she always had excuses. There was always a reason she couldn't, on weekends. She claimed she needed to focus on clients. He didn't know that those weekends were when she met other men. The real blow came one afternoon when David went through their joint bank account to pay some bills. He noticed strange transactions, high-end restaurants, hotel bookings, and boutique purchases he had never heard of. The locations were unfamiliar, and the times didn't match her supposed work hours. His heart sank as he scrolled through the statements. He called one of the hotels pretending to confirm a booking, and the receptionist told him there had been multiple stays under Samantha's name. The ground beneath him seemed to tilt. That night, he sat on the edge of their bed, staring at her as she slept peacefully. He studied her face, searching for the woman he used to know. She looked innocent, almost angelic, but the knowledge of her deception gnawed at him. He wondered who she was dreaming about. It wasn't him, he knew that much. He turned away, feeling a deep, quiet rage forming inside his chest. In the following days, David became more observant. He noticed the way Samantha smiled when she read messages, the way her phone was always locked now, and how she avoided physical closeness. He started following her routine more carefully, what time she left, where she said she was going, and how long she stayed out. He didn't want to believe she could betray him, but the evidence kept building. Every lie chipped away at his sanity. One evening, when Samantha said she had a client dinner downtown, David decided to follow her. He waited until she left, then drove behind her quietly, keeping a safe distance. His palms were sweating, his heart thudding with each turn she made. She parked outside an upscale restaurant and walked in. Minutes later, he saw her through the glass window, laughing, her hand lightly touching the arm of a man he didn't recognize. The man looked younger, confident, wearing a fitted suit. David froze in his car, watching the life he thought he knew unravel in front of him. He stayed there for almost 2 hours, watching them eat, laugh, and leave together. When they stepped out, the man placed his hand on the small of her back, and she didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned closer. They walked to her car, and David's vision blurred with anger. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white, but he didn't move. He just sat there, helpless, while she drove off with the man. Later that night, when she came home, Samantha acted as if everything was normal. She smiled at him, asked about his day, and mentioned her client dinner. David stared at her in silence, pretending to believe her, even though his insides were burning. He didn't say a word because he wasn't ready to reveal what he knew. He wanted proof, undeniable, uncheckable proof, before he acted. The next day, he went to a hardware store and bought a small GPS tracker. He installed it discreetly under her car while she was asleep. He also ordered a hidden camera online, which he placed in their living room, angled perfectly toward the front door. He needed to see who was coming and going when he wasn't home. A few days later, the tracker showed her car parked at another hotel. The pattern was too clear to ignore now. She wasn't just meeting someone, she was living a double life. David didn't confront her. Instead, he drove to that same hotel, parked across the street, and waited. He saw her step out of the elevator with another man. Not the one from the restaurant, a different one. That was the moment his world stopped making sense. It wasn't just one affair. It was two. Two different men? Two different lies? When she came home later that night, pretending nothing had happened, David realized that the woman he loved no longer existed. In her place was someone else, someone capable of deceiving two men and still sleeping peacefully beside her husband. He didn't know what hurt more, her betrayal or his own helplessness. That night, David lay awake staring at the ceiling. The ticking clock was the only sound in the room. Each second stretched endlessly, echoing the rhythm of his breaking heart. He had found the truth, but he didn't feel stronger for it. He felt hollow, fragile, and dangerously close to doing something he might never come back from. David woke up the next morning, feeling like a stranger in his own home. The walls that once held laughter now felt heavy with silence. He couldn't look at Samantha the same way anymore. Every glance reminded him of the lies she was living. She moved around the house as if nothing had changed, humming softly while preparing coffee, her phone constantly in reach. He watched her every move, memorizing her habits, studying her patterns, and waiting for a crack to appear in her mask. She had no idea he already knew everything. His mind began to split in two. One part still loved her, the version of her that used to exist, the one who once looked at him with warmth. The other part, darker and colder, wanted revenge. He couldn't focus at work anymore. His hands trembled when holding tools, and his coworkers noticed his distraction, but he brushed it off with weak excuses. At night, he replayed the footage from the hidden camera, staring at the moments she thought she was alone. He watched her sit on the couch, smile at messages, take calls in hushed tones, and sometimes stare into space with a satisfied grin. She wasn't hiding guilt. She was living comfortably in her deceit. Days turned into weeks, and David's quiet investigation deepened. The GPS tracker revealed a pattern, certain places she visited regularly that weren't connected to any business. He began following her routes after work, sometimes parking far enough not to be seen. He took pictures, made notes, and kept everything in a folder labeled only with her initials. It wasn't just about catching her anymore. It was about understanding how far the betrayal went. One evening, while reviewing the GPS logs, David noticed she had been spending time at a gym on the other side of town. He remembered the name. It belonged to Ryan, the man who had messaged her before. He decided to go there. The next day, during his lunch break, he parked across the street from the gym and waited. A few minutes later, he saw her car pull up. She stepped out wearing workout clothes he'd never seen before, her hair tied back, looking almost too perfect. Ryan came out to meet her, tall and muscular, smiling like a man who knew exactly what he was getting. They hugged casually before walking inside together. David sat frozen in the car, his stomach twisting in disgust. It wasn't just the physical closeness that hurt. It was how natural she looked beside him, how easy it seemed for her to live two lives without flinching. He stayed until they left, watching her laugh as she got into her car and drove off. He followed from a distance. Instead of heading home, she stopped at a hotel near the highway. A few minutes later, Ryan's car appeared. David turned off his engine and sat in silence, staring at the glowing hotel sign. It was the confirmation he never wanted but always expected. He didn't go inside. He couldn't. The image in his mind was already enough to shatter him. When she came home hours later, her face was flushed, her tone cheerful, as if she had simply gone to work out. She kissed him on the cheek, pretending affection, while he stared blankly at the floor. That night, he didn't sleep. He scrolled through her social media accounts, tracing connections, looking for anything that might explain the second man. He found him through a comment, Mark, a wealthy businessman who followed her page and often complimented her products. There were photos of her attending an event hosted by him months ago, smiling like she belonged there. David clicked on Mark's profile and saw pictures of expensive cars, luxury vacations, and designer suits. He realized Samantha had found a second life of wealth and excitement, one he could never give her. The following week, the tracker revealed meetings with both men. Sometimes she saw Ryan in the mornings and Mark in the evenings. It was a pattern of lies stitched together so perfectly that no one in her circle would suspect a thing. David recorded every location, every timestamp, every purchase linked to her card. The evidence grew heavy, hundreds of images, screenshots, and notes stored on his laptop. He wasn't sure what he planned to do with it, but he needed to keep gathering more. He wanted her to feel the same pain she had caused him, multiplied by shame and exposure. The rage inside him began to harden into calculation. Instead of confronting her, he decided to collect undeniable proof. He purchased another hidden camera, this time disguised as a clock, and placed it in the corner of the bedroom. He set it to record automatically whenever there was motion. The footage captured Samantha on her phone late at night, smiling at messages and taking secret calls in the bathroom. On one occasion, she received a video call, and the faint reflection on the mirror behind her showed Ryan's face. David watched everything in silence, his body numb. He saved the footage to an external drive and hid it in his toolbox at work. Every day he carried it with him, like a silent reminder of how his marriage had died. He stopped eating meals with her, stopped asking about her day. When she asked if something was wrong, he simply said he was tired. The truth was, he was broken beyond words. As the days passed, David noticed Samantha growing more confident. She no longer tried to hide her late nights. She laughed more, spent longer hours away, and stopped pretending to care about his feelings. It was as if she had decided that his blindness was permanent. She underestimated him completely. One night, while she was asleep, David went through her phone using her fingerprint, something she used carelessly while dozing off. What he found made his blood run cold. There were intimate photos with both men, affectionate messages, and even plans for the future. She told Ryan that she would leave her husband soon. And she told Mark that her marriage was only on paper. The lies twisted around each other like a web she thought she controlled. He scrolled further and found messages showing that she had borrowed money from Mark under false pretenses, claiming she needed funds for her business expansion. In reality, she had spent that money on vacations with Ryan. The scale of deception stunned him. It wasn't just cheating. It was manipulation, greed, and complete moral collapse. David sat there for hours, reading through her double life until the morning light crept through the curtains. He didn't feel like the same man anymore. The warmth that once filled his heart had turned into something cold and sharp. He realized that Samantha wasn't just betraying him emotionally. She was using him as cover while building an empire of lies with two other men. From that day on, he stopped seeing her as his wife. He saw her as a threat, a person who had destroyed everything sacred in their home. His sadness dissolved into quiet determination. He made backups of all the evidence, labeling each file with dates and names. He printed photos and stored them in an envelope hidden behind the air vent in their bedroom. Samantha continued living freely, unaware that every move she made was being recorded. She believed she had everything under control, that David was too naive to notice. But the truth was, he noticed everything now. Every glance, every lie, every faint scent of unfamiliar cologne she brought home. He had turned into a shadow in his own house, watching, listening, and waiting. Each night, while she slept beside him, David stared at the ceiling, planning his next step. He didn't know exactly what kind of revenge he wanted yet, whether it would be through exposure, humiliation, or something darker. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Samantha's secret life was about to end, and when it did, he would be the one to end it. The following weeks moved slowly, each day dragging David deeper into a darkness he didn't know he was capable of feeling. Every morning, Samantha left home wearing the same bright smile, and every night she returned pretending to be tired from work. To anyone else, she looked like a hard-working wife balancing a career and marriage, but David knew better now. He knew about the messages, the meetings, the hotel rooms, and the men. The more evidence he gathered, the more detached he became from the world around him. His job, his friends, even his own reflection in the mirror started to feel meaningless. His entire existence revolved around watching her destroy the life they had built together. He began noticing small details that revealed just how comfortable she had grown in her deceit. She no longer cared to hide the marks on her neck, the perfume that wasn't hers, or the extra phone she thought he hadn't seen. She talked on it late at night, whispering softly from the balcony while thinking he was asleep. But David was never asleep anymore. He lay there, staring into the dark, memorizing every word she said, every careless lie that rolled off her tongue. One evening he got home earlier than usual and saw her car in the driveway. He entered quietly, moving toward the living room where faint laughter echoed. He froze when he saw Ryan sitting on their couch, holding a glass of wine. Samantha was beside him, her legs crossed, her expression carefree. David backed away silently, his breath catching in his throat. He slipped outside before they noticed and drove off without a word. He sat in his truck for an hour, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his hands ached. That was the moment something inside him hardened. It wasn't jealousy anymore. It was humiliation, a deep, festering wound that burned hotter than anger. The next morning, Samantha acted like nothing had happened. She served him breakfast with the same fake tenderness, unaware that he had seen everything. That's when his mind shifted from pain to planning. He knew she wouldn't stop. He knew confronting her would only lead to lies. So he decided to let her destroy herself, but he would be there to make sure the fall was complete. He bought 2 more hidden cameras and placed one in the living room, replacing the earlier one with a higher quality model, and the other in the garage where she sometimes met Ryan. He even set up a motion-activated recorder near her desk, where she often made phone calls. His house, once filled with memories of love, had now become a surveillance trap. Every corner carried a secret lens, and every room held silent witnesses to her betrayal. As the days passed, the recordings painted an even darker picture than David expected. Samantha wasn't just seeing Ryan and Mark separately. She was manipulating both of them in ways that bordered on dangerous. She told Ryan that she loved him, that David was abusive, that she planned to leave soon. She told Mark that David was controlling and that she needed financial help to free herself. David realized she was building sympathy and power, turning every lie into an advantage. He began piecing together her motives. She wanted wealth from Mark and passion from Ryan. She was feeding her ego with the attention of both men while using David's stability as her safety net. The realization made him sick. He had loved her deeply once, had trusted her completely, and now she was using that trust to fund her double life. The more evidence David collected, the more meticulous he became. He labeled folders with dates, created backup drives, and even printed photos in case anything happened to his devices. He wasn't sure if he was preparing for confrontation or something far worse. His mind oscillated between revenge and despair, between wanting to expose her and wanting to make her feel the pain she had caused him. One Friday evening, Samantha told him she had a business dinner. She left in a rush, her hair perfectly styled, her perfume heavy in the air. David waited 20 minutes before following. The tracker showed her heading toward a small restaurant on the outskirts of the city. When he arrived, he saw Ryan's car parked outside. He stayed hidden and watched through the large glass window. Inside, Samantha laughed loudly, her hand resting on Ryan's arm. To the other diners, they looked like lovers, carefree and deeply connected. To David, they looked like poison. He watched them for over an hour. They finished dinner, walked out holding hands, and drove away in separate cars. David followed Samantha's car, expecting her to go home. Instead, she stopped at a luxury villa just outside town. Minutes later, Mark's car arrived. David's pulse quickened as he realized what was happening. She had spent the evening with Ryan and was now meeting Mark right after. He parked across the road and stayed inside his truck, watching from a distance. Through the window, he saw her greeting Mark with a warm embrace, pouring wine and sitting close. She was switching between two lives so effortlessly that it seemed practiced, almost rehearsed. David realized that he wasn't watching a woman in love. He was watching a master manipulator, someone capable of lying with absolute calm. He recorded everything from the dashboard camera, making sure to capture every movement, every gesture. Later that night, when she came home, she smiled faintly and said she was exhausted. David nodded quietly, hiding the fury that burned behind his calm expression. He went to the garage afterward, replaying the footage again and again until sunrise. Days later, his friend Adam, who worked as a private investigator, noticed his growing distress and offered help. David gave him the recordings, pretending he needed professional confirmation of infidelity for legal reasons. Adam analyzed the data and returned with a grim conclusion. Samantha's pattern showed premeditation. She had financial connections with both men, including shared accounts, and her messages hinted at future plans without David in them. The evidence was undeniable now. She wasn't just cheating, she was preparing to leave, taking everything she could. That weekend, Samantha hosted a small party at their home, claiming it was for her clients. David pretended to be supportive, smiling as she introduced guests and played the perfect hostess. But his attention wasn't on the guests, it was on Ryan, who showed up later that evening. Samantha introduced him as a business partner, and Ryan played along. David shook his hand, his expression steady, though his insides twisted. He noticed how Ryan's eyes lingered on Samantha, how she avoided meeting his gaze whenever David was near. When the night ended, David checked the camera footage and saw what he had expected. After the guests left, Samantha lingered in the kitchen with Ryan, touching his arm, whispering close. It was short, but enough. Enough for David to realize how deeply the deception had rooted itself. He knew she wasn't afraid of being caught anymore. She thought he was too weak to act. That thought alone changed him completely. He stopped being the silent observer and began planning his retaliation. He didn't want to confront her in anger. He wanted to end this in a way that would destroy her carefully built lies. By now, he had enough evidence to ruin her socially, financially, and legally. But he didn't want to hand it over yet. He wanted her to feel the weight of her own actions, to watch her perfect world collapse, piece by piece. He decided to give her more freedom, to make her believe he was blind again. He started smiling at her, acting kind, pretending that everything was back to normal. Samantha, too confident in her deceit, believed the act completely. She thought she had regained control. But behind every smile David gave, there was a storm building, quiet, calculated, and inevitable. He knew the day was coming when she would walk straight into her own destruction. And when that day arrived, he would be waiting, not as the betrayed husband, but as the man she had turned into something far colder. The night Samantha had promised was crisp and clear, the kind of evening that made every light glow sharper against the dark. She left the house with a small leather bag and a kiss that felt practiced. David watched her go from the window, the pale streetlight smoothing the edges of his anger into something clinical. He did not follow at once. He wanted the moment to unfold in its own way, without his interference. He wanted to see how thoroughly she had woven her lies together. She drove to a villa far from the city, a place with tall hedges and a gated entrance. The GPS showed her arrival, and David parked a distance away where he could see the driveway but remain unseen. He watched as two cars slipped into the property not long after she did. The cars belonged to the men he had traced for weeks. Ryan, whose easy charm masked a shaky temper, and Mark, whose wealth had given him a controlling calm. Samantha had chosen the house carefully, a neutral place where she could play both parts without suspicion. From his vantage point, David peered through binoculars and felt the familiar cold knot in his stomach. The villa's lights flickered on, and silhouettes moved inside. The cameras he had planted earlier were not in use this night. He had decided to watch without relying on recorded proof. He wanted the raw truth, the unscripted collapse. The sound of laughter drifted faintly on the wind, a cruel soundtrack to the scene he had not imagined when he had vowed to protect his marriage. He had never seen Samantha laugh like that with anyone but him. Tonight the sound was a blade, time slowed. He watched as guests moved from the living area to the terrace, carrying drinks, leaning into easy conversation. At some point the mood in the villa shifted. The laughter thinned and folded into tension. Samantha moved between the two men, smoothing wrinkles in the evening, playing peacemaker in a situation she had created. Her hands fluttered, a gesture he knew well, a habit once used to calm arguments at home. Now those same gestures stitched a web that trapped them all. He saw Ryan stand, agitated, hands slicing the air with impatient motion. Mark remained seated, face unreadable, fingers drumming a slow rhythm on a glass. Samantha walked away briefly, returning with a smile that tried to mask a pulse of fear beneath. The three of them circled one another like animals testing the edges of a wound. David's breath tightened. He had not wanted violence. He had wanted exposure, humiliation, the slow unraveling of her comfortable world. Yet he could feel danger gathering like a storm on the horizon, inevitable and loud. When the argument flared, it flared without warning. Ryan's anger, once ignited, became a flame that swallowed reason. He accused without words that were visible only in his fists and in the way he stamped the floor. Mark rose, steady but furious, and the room filled with broken tension. Samantha stepped between them, her posture frantic and yet composed in the way of someone who had always known how to bend reality to her will. In a fast, terrible moment, one shove led to another. An arm reached, a shoulder hit a table, and a heavy lamp tipped. It struck Mark's head with a dull, ignominious sound that echoed like a closing door. He collapsed, motionless, the room suddenly deaf to everything but the beating of frightened hearts. Samantha's face drained of color. Ryan bolted, fear turning his legs into a vehicle that carried him through the back gate and away into the night. Samantha fell to her knees beside Mark, hands trembling as she checked for signs of life. The villa had become a place of shattered glass and stunned silence. David sat in his car far from the house and watched his plan become something he had not planned for at all. The shock did not warm him. It froze him to the spot. He had wanted her world to fall, but he had not pictured a body on a marble floor. When sirens cut across the quiet night, Samantha tried to craft a story. She wanted it to be a mistake, a tragic accident born of confusion and fear. The paramedics and police arrived with practiced speed, moving through the villa like a machine designed to find truth in chaos. Neighbors gathered at a distance, the sort of crowd that breeds rumors quickly. Flashing lights painted the hedges blue and red, a violent new color for a place that had seen only laughter hours before. David could have walked into the middle of it. He could have handed over the evidence he had stored in his glove compartment or the backup drives in his toolbox. He could have torn the veil of lies away and let sunlight bleach every corner. Instead, he felt an unexpected, hollow satisfaction that came from watching rather than acting. He had recorded enough to prove infidelity. He had not recorded the fatal moment that would rewrite their lives. The absence of that one clip became a weapon in his hands. For days, Samantha faced the glare of investigation. She spun a plausible tale of argument and accident. Reporters circled, hungry for detail, and social media erupted with guesses and speculation. Mark's death became a signal fire, consuming reputations long after the last interview. Ryan's disappearance added to the mystery, painting him as both suspect and victim of panic. Samantha was held for questioning, her business crumbling as clients peeled away from the scandal like leaves from a dying tree. Her bank accounts were frozen pending inquiry. An empire built on deception began to show the cracks David had anticipated. He watched it all from a distance that felt safe but lonely. People assumed the scandal itself would be revenge enough. Friends offered sympathy he did not accept and asked questions he refused to answer. He told what was necessary, that he was shocked by what had happened, and kept the rest to himself. He knew that the unedited truth could complicate the case and the story he had curated. He had already decided which pieces to reveal. Privately, he edited files. He deleted footage that showed the earlier, small moments where Samantha's panic had led to a shove toward Mark. He preserved the clips that painted her as reckless and manipulative, the ones that showed her juggling two men with an appetite for gain. He packaged those into an anonymous tip and fed it to the investigators through a source who would not be traced. The narrative shifted exactly as he intended, from an accidental blow to a portrait of a woman whose affairs and schemes laid the groundwork for tragedy. When Ryan resurfaced weeks later, pulled from the edges of a highway town by police, his testimony carried tremors of fear and guilt. He painted a picture of desperation, of a man who had fled at a sound and a sight he could not face. Samantha's image in the press hardened. The public needed a villain, and she fit the role the evidence had been curated to create. Court documents began to stack up. The legal machinery churned, and an arrest followed. Yet even as Samantha faced charges and the city watched her fall, David felt no triumph. The house they had shared was sold within months, emptied of the things that tied him to memory. The camera files he had kept lay in a locked case, a record of love turned into methodical ruin. He had orchestrated exposure, chosen what to show and what to hide, and in so doing had become someone new. The ache at the base of his sternum was not defeat. It was a space where something he had loved had been replaced by a cold, precise justice he had delivered himself. At night, when the city slept and the case cooled to a slow ember, he would take out the drives and watch the raw files he had not shown. In those unedited seconds, he saw the woman he had loved and the desperate shock of the moment that had killed a man. He kept that truth like a secret currency, one that promised power and cost him more than any courtroom could ever exact. The villa incident had broken more than one life. It had broken the illusion he had clung to and reshaped him into the architect of a silence that would never fully leave him. Months have passed since the night that destroyed everything, but the echoes of that moment followed David like a ghost he couldn't silence. The trial had begun with sharp headlines and hollow sympathy, painting Samantha as both seductress and manipulator. Every image, every word, every piece of footage that reached the courtroom seemed to tighten the noose around her. The public called her heartless. The jury called her guilty. But David, sitting in the back of that cold courtroom, knew the story was not as clean as it appeared. He had created this version of the truth. He had chosen which fragments of her life would survive. The judge's voice echoed through the room when the sentence was announced: 15 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter. Samantha stood still, her face pale, her eyes empty of everything except disbelief. Her hands trembled once before she clasped them together, a faint sign that she was holding herself together in front of the world that had once adored her. David watched her being led away, the chains at her wrists glinting like a cruel ornament. He had thought this moment would bring him peace, but as the gavel struck, the silence inside him deepened instead. After the verdict, the world moved on. Reporters found new scandals to feed on, and the case that once dominated headlines was soon reduced to a short segment buried in digital archives. David tried to return to normal life, but nothing about it felt normal. The house was gone. The memories were packed in boxes he couldn't open. Even sleep had become a fragile thing, easily broken by images of that night, the lamp falling, the thud, the scream that hadn't been recorded. He found himself replaying the scene in his mind, rearranging details, wondering if his silence had rewritten fate too severely. He had the proof that could have changed everything, hidden on a drive labeled simply Archive. On it was the raw, unedited version of the night, the one that showed Samantha's shove as an act of panic rather than intent. It could have saved her from prison. But he had kept it buried, afraid that releasing it would undo the revenge he had waited too long to achieve. Now, sitting alone in a small apartment miles from where they once lived, he questioned whether revenge was ever worth the emptiness it left behind. One rainy evening, he received a letter stamped with the state prison's insignia. It was from Samantha. The handwriting was neat but strained, each word written as if it cost her effort to steady her hands. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't deny what she'd done. The letter spoke of regret, confusion, and the weight of being trapped in a story she didn't entirely understand. She wrote about Ryan too, how he had visited once broken by guilt, claiming that Mark's death wasn't just an accident, but something more complicated. He had hinted at a hidden motive, something involving money, threats, and betrayal. But before Samantha could explain further, the letter ended abruptly, signed only with her initials. The mention of money unsettled David. He remembered the transfers he had seen in Samantha's business records months before the affair began, large amounts moving quietly between accounts. At the time, he assumed it was part of her financial deception, but now it looked different, more deliberate. He began to dig again, tracing old files, old contacts, and old transactions. The deeper he went, the clearer it became that Mark and Ryan had been connected long before Samantha became part of it. They had both been involved in a failed real estate investment that collapsed under fraud allegations. Mark had lost millions. Ryan had vanished before the case went public. Samantha, with her charm and her growing business, had become the perfect distraction for them both, and eventually the perfect scapegoat. David realized that her affair hadn't just been betrayal. It had been manipulation from both sides. Mark had wanted access to her finances. Ryan had wanted revenge on Mark. And Samantha had believed she was the one in control when, in truth, she was trapped between two men who used her as a weapon against each other. The night at the villa had been a meeting meant to settle debts and secrets, not just love and jealousy. When tempers rose and the lamp fell, it wasn't just passion that ended Mark's life. It was greed, desperation, and lies colliding in one fatal instant. The revelation left David torn. He could expose the truth and clear Samantha's name, but that would also reveal his manipulation, the footage he withheld, the anonymous tips he sent, the way he had shaped her downfall to look deliberate. He had become part of the lie he wanted to destroy. Still, the thought of her wasting years behind bars for a crime that wasn't entirely hers began to rot inside him. The guilt grew stronger than the satisfaction that had once comforted him. Weeks passed before he made his decision. One morning, before dawn, he drove to the district attorney's office with the hidden drive in his pocket. He sat in his car for almost an hour, watching the sun rise over the courthouse steps, unable to move. When he finally walked inside, the air smelled of paper and coffee and quiet judgment. He handed over the drive anonymously, leaving it in a sealed envelope marked Evidence Correction. He didn't sign his name. He didn't wait for thanks. He just walked away, the weight in his chest shifting from vengeance to release. A month later, the news broke quietly. A review of Samantha's case had been opened. The footage revealed inconsistencies that changed the entire timeline of events. Her sentence was overturned on appeal, reduced to time served, and she was released after 2 years behind bars. David read the article alone, his hands steady but his heart restless. He didn't contact her. He didn't need to. He knew she would recognize the truth's return as his final confession. Samantha disappeared from public life after her release. She sold what remained of her business and moved to another state under a different name. Ryan vanished again, last seen leaving the country under questionable circumstances. The world forgot them one by one, erasing the noise that had once defined their lives. David stayed where he was, in the same quiet apartment, surrounded by silence that felt both earned and endless. Sometimes, late at night, he replayed the old footage one last time. Not the edited versions or the courtroom exhibits, but the real one. He would watch Samantha as she smiled, as she made mistakes, as fear crossed her face in that final moment. Then he would close the screen and sit in the dark, wondering if he had freed her too late, or if some part of him had always wanted her to suffer first. The villa where it all happened was sold to a new owner, renovated and repainted. The stains were gone, the walls restored, the story forgotten by everyone except the man who had watched it all unfold. David sometimes drove past it, never stopping, only slowing long enough to see the lights flickering through new curtains. Justice had been delivered, though not by law. Truth had been exposed, but only after too much was lost. In the end, everyone had paid a price. Samantha for her deceit, Mark for his greed, Ryan for his cowardice, and David for his revenge. The story that had started as a tale of love and betrayal had turned into something colder and quieter, the kind of tragedy where no one wins, only survives. And as David looked out at the city one final time, he understood that true crime wasn't just about death or deception. Sometimes it was about how far a person would go to feel right, even if it meant losing everything that once made them human.